a real privilege, I think, to welcome Mark Windows. Thank you very much.
So long in working mates clubs, you know. It's almost like we've had the raffle and now we're going to get onto the important bit, you know. But thanks for coming along. The things about this sort of information I'm putting out is that there's a bit of a resistance to it in a way because people don't really understand it. But in actual fact, it's very, very simple. There's a global management concept which actually implements itself locally, through your local council. However, your local council doesn't have much say in it, and we're going to get onto why that is in a minute. I just wanted to, before I start, give you some information. We've all heard about social cleansing, regeneration, these kind of mantras that come out, and we're always told that we need to build more and more houses. However, there is a bigger agenda behind this, and I saw it being enforced, because that's what we're talking about here, enforcement through legislation, and basically the removal of public consultation. That is one of the most important things about this agenda. So if we started, say, with the housing crisis and all the rest of it, I would say there is no housing crisis. What we have is an agenda that's being put in, and it's an inflated market which increases prices, and it's basically about developers and speculators making a killing. How could this happen? How could London be re-engineered within 3 years? How can they knock down 400,000 council homes with no consultation? Because it's part of what I'm talking about. So social cleansing is the nice name for what we are going to be talking about this evening. But for instance, did you know in London that all council property was redefined as brownfield, dirty industrial wasteland, at a private conference in 2016 for developers? The public weren't allowed in. It was held at Canary Wharf in London with private security and their own police, so nobody could protest against it. And in that conference, they designated all council property as brownfield land, in other words, to be sold off. And a lot of this goes into legislation from local authorities from years ago, the Planning Act, basically you've got the Localism Act, brought a lot of this sort of stuff in. We don't need to go into the particular legislation, but all legislation is there. So we get Savills, the estate agents, advising local councils on their housing policy. Well, wait a minute, why would an estate agent be advising local councils on their housing policy? Because this is a corporate agenda. It's all about a land grab. Now, we've got so much information here. I'm trying to get over it very quickly. There's so much to get through. But basically, we have a thing called managed decline, which will facilitate redevelopment. Doesn't matter where you live in the country. Every town, city and village has been affected by this. Most people who live in small villages will know that there's a huge new development on the doorstep. And this is going to be a real problem with infrastructure. Now, believe it or not, all this has been planned because they don't want anybody having private transport. They will find out where all this came from as this continues, right? So 400,000 to lose their homes. Yes, basically the Elephant and Castle regeneration scheme, the whole of South London basically turned into a shopping mall with high-density flats, a gym, and a mini Tesco. So there's a uniformity going on here. When we hear about diverse communities, what they're actually talking about is a monoculture. They're keeping everybody in one place. The reason that is because under the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 plans, they want 2/3 of the world's population living in smart, surveilled super cities. London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, maybe a couple more. But what we're going to have is the Internet of Things controlling everything, everyone in super cities, everyone using public transport, private transport to be abolished. And that is why you are having so much trouble if you're a motorist now. I lived in a borough of northeast London called Waltham Forest, which became part of this mini Holland thing. Doesn't it sound great, mini Holland? Oh, that sounds bohemian, doesn't it? People cycling about, lots of cafes, people having mad cigarettes on the street.
Well, actually, in Waltham Forest, it's more like crazed people who are psychotic on skunk with knives. Well, that's diversity, ladies and gentlemen, right? I don't want to trivialize this, but I lived in that borough for 24 years. Now, how can the whole of that borough be re-engineered within 3 years with no planning and no consultation? How can that happen? It can happen because of what we're going to talk about this evening. And I sold my flat there because I couldn't get out. I had 2 vehicles, and I was getting trapped in. They closed off 70 roads with no public consultation. This came through the Cabinet Office. It's a thing called Mini Holland. And guess what? This is what the council tell you. Waltham Forest has won! Mini Holland, we've won! Oh, great, what have we won? You know, I can't wait to see what it is. What is it? It's thousands of flats being built on your doorstep, right? It's all the roads closed. It's the introduction of just chain stores and corporate partners. All local businesses go. The business rates go through the roof. Next thing, you're living in a shopping mall. But there's more to it than that. I saw where I live turn into an open concentration camp within 3 years. How can they do it? Well, it all comes through local government, but it's much bigger than local government. I just want to play you something where the cabinet leader of the cabinet member for the environment, a fellow called Clyde Lokes, who's what they call a change agent, was brought into Waltham Forest before all these plans became public, and he enforced them all. And what they did is they closed off a place called Walthamstow Village. They started with a place called the Village, but then they created another 3 or 4 villages in Walthamstow. So in other words, what they're doing is closing off areas, and it's very well thought out. But he wasn't too popular, Mr. Lokes, when he had to face the public, because these people have no public engagement. So this is what happened when Mr. Lokes actually got to be confronted by some of the public. This is basically what we're talking about. No one can get out. This was a village. Now, this was the big open day where the public are going to say, thank you for creating this beautiful pedestrianised area. But nobody could get out. And this is local people trying to confront Mr. Lokes here. Well, there's a great moment where he does exactly what he should do in a minute. He stops talking to the adults, which is very interesting. But I've engaged with Mr. Lokes quite a lot over the years, and it's very interesting to see what comes back. But everyone in this room will have someone like this in their local. He talks to an 8-year-old kid, so he's getting abuse off the public. What do? I'll talk to an 8-year-old kid. Sustainable development's great, isn't it? Do you like having your bike out more? Isn't it safer now? Nobody can use their cars. You know, that's what he's doing, right? Now, point is, okay, we've kind of seen enough of that, really. Well, the point is that I wrote to Clyde Lokes, and I'll tell you what he wrote back in a little while. This is going to be very interesting. We've got the bigger picture coming up now, and if I press F5, then we go into the presentation, ladies and gentlemen, the presentation. So, this is a great quote. I love to start with this. Only the small secrets need to be protected. The large ones are kept secret by public incredulity. In other words, that's a conspiracy theory. You know, I mean, this is the sort of thing that people still say about Agenda 21. Agenda 21, 2030. Basically, this is it in a nutshell, and I'm going to explain how it's implemented and who did it. It's Agenda 21 came out in the 1990s. Every local council in this country signed up for the local sustainable development plans, the local action plan of Agenda 21. I've seen the documents. People all over the country have sent them to me. So when people like Clyde Lokes or your local cabinet member for the environment say that's a conspiracy theory, no, it's not. It's a 40-chapter document. Billionaire financiers and the World Bank decided to take over all infrastructure which affects the livelihood of people using a well-thought-out and highly organized control system which is enforced through propaganda, psychological manipulation, and legislation at every level of power, global to local. The world population have been coerced into a new form of original sin, and will pay massive amounts in taxation and lose all rights and property on the back of a new form of benefice called sustainable development, right? Now, this is very important because it is the biggest land grab in world history, and we're going to get onto that. 50% of the world is going to be given away in a conference this year. Did you know that? Oh, there you go. What is the Global Action Plan? We're going to tell you. How is it implemented at a local level? Going to tell you. How does it affect you? I'm going to tell you that. So the Global Action Plan is well thought out, but quite simple. It's all-encompassing, but the template is being introduced everywhere. In other words, it's a template. Once you know how this works, you cannot unsee it. And it's very simple. It has to be very simple because of the way it's implemented. In other words, the template has to be implemented everywhere with the same people behind it. So it is very interesting the way they bring it in. It isn't overwhelmingly complicated. No, it's not. It is huge. So the administration system, every administration system works like this, as probably everyone will know. You have an elite priest class at the top, or an assumed elite priest class, or billionaires as we have them now. They're not the new priest class. Administrators, they're given knowledge relative to position, which is most people who have no argument when they try and argue against fact. This happens a lot these days. There's so many people who are in that position, the serfs are ignorant of the knowledge. So, world government is structureless in the eyes of the public. In other words, the term world government is a misdirection for those who know a little about the governance system, and for those who don't, it's a conspiracy theory. The public are always placed in between two lies, two parties, two opposing views. All political parties are one solid mechanism working towards one aim. And that is one thing that I learned a long time ago. And the way I learned this was listening to ex-KGB instructors on places like YouTube, all in Russian, but they tell you how the system of management, in other words, the whole of the idea of governance is a management concept. Religion is a management concept, and it has to be aimed at the right sort of people who are going to be managed. That's all it is. You have to tell them what they need to hear. So the priest-class interface between truth and lies. This is a great quote from a fellow called Charles Fort. He used to sit in libraries up until the early 1930s in New York when he died. And he trawled newspapers for the most bizarre stories that he could possibly find. And this is one of his quotes. "The earth is a farm, we are someone else's property." Now, this ties in to this assumption that I'm going to be talking about. In this system, we are property. We are property. Divine beings, however, are not property. Persons are property, because that's you on paper. Things are property, and property can be conveyed between interested parties, which is what happens in a court. Blood bonds are black magic. We have a birth certificate, and our blood is taken at birth, put on a Guthrie card. Also, you can have a 5-day test now that the NHS take the baby's blood. But basically, that's getting a bit esoteric, but it's very important to know how we're controlled and what we are within the system. The main problem people have with what I'm talking about is they don't understand how the actual system works. It's just management. There's nothing personal in it. It's not good or bad. It's a system of management. So you are property. All land, assets, people, ideas, actions, beliefs, and energy are the property of the state. That's this new totalitarianism. This is called the common good. A totalitarian system, anything outside its strictly enforced ideology, is demonized and shut down. The global system's collectivist agents and what we call useful idiots, this is what the KGB used to call useful idiots. These are actually people who are in the local council, like Mr. Lokes there. I've called him a useful idiot on many occasions, very well paid one though. Currently describe anything outside this as a right-wing conspiracy theory now. This is a great quote from Charles Sullivan. Now, this is all about the press. We have an unelected media. We have to think about this. Recently, I had to get onto a newspaper because they libeled a group of people in this local area. And they did it because they thought they could, because the police had told them something that the police had heard, which was hearsay. And I reminded them that it was libel. Now, this is really, really important because what we have now is a new breed of so-called journalist. They're a repeater of propaganda, an unquestioning and willfully ignorant servant of controlled narratives. Read The Guardian. They have story after story which has no facts. great term came out. This is part of the explanation as to why people have a cognitive dissonance about what I'm talking about. The post-truth world became phrase of the year in 2016. And it's basically the idea that people will accept an argument based on emotion and belief over facts. That's incredibly important when you're talking about propagandizing people. That's me outside the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, where a lot of the NGOs and think tanks that run a lot of this global governance actually come from. And when you look at the history of what it was about, the whole history of the Tavistock was about propaganda. It was about making war sound as though it was a heroic thing. And they were looking at the effect of post-traumatic stress on war veterans and how that affected them. Now, the thing is, in society, there's loads of emotional triggers being put out all the time, and people react accordingly. Really interesting, but the Tavistock Institute is in the same building as the Economic and Social Research Council, which pushes policy into the government. It's also the home of the British Psychological Association, who put out lots and lots of papers which push people into this controlled narrative and basically say anything outside of it, outside the controlled opinion corridor, the allowed opinion corridor, is a conspiracy theory or it's some right-wing nut job, right? This is interesting because this fella in 1969 gave a lecture, and he worked at Mount Sinai Hospital. He was a pediatrician. He worked for what became the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Planned Parenthood. And he gave an off-the-cuff lecture to his students. And everything that he said has actually happened and has been integrated into the policies I'm going to talk about tonight. This is proof that, well, let's say it was prophetic, but it's not prophetic. People think, how did you know that was going to happen? Because I just read the documents. It's all there. Some of you will think, what I'm talking about is communism. Well, what I'm talking about is much bigger than communism. So basically what he talked about was there'd be a police-state totalitarianism, there'd be the real and the stated goals. In other words, everything that you have to agree to has to be presented as a benefit. It has to be presented as a benefit, otherwise you're not going to agree to it, are you? So that's very important. But the real goals are basically behind that. So you get a benefit. Yes, we're going to help you out. We're going to solve the climate crisis. We're going to do this, but there's another agenda behind that. And that's what we're talking about here. Population control and reduction, controlling and rewriting of history, long time spent in education but nothing learnt, more control but more lawlessness. Churches and religions will help us. And this is exactly what we're going to be talking about, promotion of sex and violence. That was all in that lecture. But what we're talking about is a one world government, a one world religion, and the end of nations. That's the United Nations prayer and meditation room, and the United Nations is responsible for pushing a lot of this stuff. There's a great documentary I'd recommend anyone see it. It's called Gods of the New Age, and it's how Robert Mueller, who was UN Secretary General in the 70s, basically inducted Hindu groups and people who were into Eastern mysticism, and they joined that onto globalism. It's very, very interesting, because the aims can be the same. All that you have to do is steer people. But put simply, Agenda 21 is a global action plan implemented at local level for the control and management of all resources. It implements collectivism through consensus. Consensus isn't about agreeing, it's about appearing that the public have been given an input. And this is very important because there is no input locally. Anything that you get involved with a local council will have a facilitator and a co-facilitator and be done using the Delphi technique. We went to all of the regeneration meetings in London. It's a corporate rollout. They're there to control the narrative of public opinion. But this results in high-density cities, cycling and walking instead of private transport. Some people say it's a good thing. It can be. But when it comes to removing the rights of everyone else for the agenda, then it becomes collectivism. So how far is that from totalitarianism? It's not far at all, because that's what these plans are all about. Yeah, it aims to reduce world population and end private property and land rights. That's very important. Smart cities, mass surveillance, police state interference. So this is what they say in the local agenda action plan. This is from Haringey, but there's one for every borough in the country. Its policies seek to restrain the use of private cars. Basically, the council aims to maximise the role of cycling. What they did in Waltham Forest, they had this mantra, walk, cycle, enjoy. But I just rebranded it as walk, cycle, end joy, because there's no joy there now. All those people who thought they were buying an investment can't get out unless they take the tube. Yes, so we're going to reveal the truth behind regeneration, vibrant communities, walkable cities, smart cities, city villages, and why there's no real consultation but group consensus. Yes, it was Agenda 21 in the 90s, now it's Agenda 2030, a global action plan, implemented at local level by the UN through ICLEI. Has anyone heard of ICLEI? I-C-L-E-I? No? I'll tell you about it in a minute. Your local council knows all about it. So this is from Clyde Lokes, Cabinet Member for the Environment. I did a show, and it was called London's Dystopia Public Winning Fight Back. A bit like people here today, we had Gordon Peters, who took down a thing called the Haringey Development Vehicle, which was where Lend-Lease owned 51% of all infrastructure in Haringey. 51%. An Australian and multinational company called Lend-Lease, who are taking control of infrastructure. There's another one called Bechtel. These are the preferred partners, you see. So basically, I sent him that show because it was all about some people in two council blocks. Ironically, these two council blocks, Fred Wigg and John Walsh Towers, were the council blocks which had surface-to-air missiles placed on them during the Olympics without them actually telling the residents. So they know a bit about having no consultation. So I sent him this, and it was all about how the Haringey development vehicle was brought down and about the concerns of local residents about a new block of flats, which was going to be, it was refurbishment, but they were building another one, and basically they were going to kick all the tenants out, okay? So when they refurbish it, they kick everyone out. There's no property rights anymore, local councils. Long-term tenancies have been wiped out. So he said, hello, Mark. Thank you for your email and taking the time to contact me. However, as I don't subscribe to the hugely discredited and laughable conspiracy theories that suggest there is an Agenda 21 takeover of the world, I'm afraid I find it of no value whatsoever. I did have a few things to say to Mr. Lokes. It was quite a long response. I won't read it all out. But I said, your patronising and uninformed response clearly shows you have not listened to or considered the information presented on behalf of the constituents in your borough, Mr. Lokes. You are you not, a public servant? That's fighting talking with your local council these days. I think you'll find the door quickly shuts in your face when you bring that one up. But I said, which part of the factual information in the show is a conspiracy theory? The people featured in the show are council officials, including those who have stopped the corporate takeover in Haringey. And by dismissing the content, you are openly acting against the public interest. The truth about Claire Kober, she was basically the person who signed it all off, leader of the council in Haringey, is conveniently a conspiracy theory for those with their noses in the corporate trough. The facts about her resignation are clearly presented in the show. That's the bit he didn't like, you see. Because she had to resign, because she got found out, because she had special interest. But don't worry, your local councillors may or may not, or probably do have interest with property developers. Do look that up, because the amount of them that do is quite astonishing. So I had this conspiracy nonsense from lobbyists in Waltham Forest. They now know this is the policy of local authorities, etc. As you must be aware, Agenda 21 2030 is a global action plan implemented at a local level. You yourself stated that this is not happening in just this country, but all over Europe and America. That's what he said. He said what's happening in Waltham Forest is happening elsewhere. So he knows it's part of a bigger picture. I said, are you saying that the 40 chapters of Agenda 21 are a conspiracy theory? I challenge you to find any deficiency in the information I have presented. I also challenge you to a public debate in front of the public in your borough who you state that you represent. Your patronising response is an insult to the quality of information contained in the show. I signed it. No response to that, obviously. No response whatsoever to that one. Far too long for Mr. Lokes. He hasn't got time for things like that. That was just that. So this is what happened, right? This is what happened where I lived. Overnight, They put barricades everywhere. They blocked all the roads. And these things appeared everywhere. And they put more and more and more of them. And my mate's restaurant, where I used to go, sometimes I used to drive up there. And I'd just park round the corner. I then found I had to go 2 miles out of the way to go less than half a mile. And then all of the roads closed off, causing traffic chaos. People can't get their deliveries in. Someone had a mattress set alight on the side of the house. The fire brigade can't get in. The emergency services can't get in. This has been done in a rush, and there's a very good reason for that, because they need to implement it quickly. But this is Waltham Forest. It's absolutely re-engineered. It stayed the same. When I moved there in the early 90s, it stayed the same until 2014. Then in 2015, it started changing. It's unrecognizable now. Absolutely unrecognizable. Where I lived, I had a little one-bedroom flat. Houses in that road were going for 950 grand because this is the gentrification. It's trendy, folks. So what we're going to do is get your parents to sell their estate so you get a one-bedroom flat in basically a block in London that's going to be pulled down anyway. There are no property rights in this. So yeah, that happened overnight. And the Transport for London guy on the barricades, I said, what's going on here? He said, oh, yeah, well, it's all going to be implemented. I said, but this is just like a test, isn't it, to see, you know, if it works. And he says, no, 65% of people are in favour. I said, well, that's very strange, because there's been no public consultation so far, and there hadn't. So they're just blatant about it, really. So, yeah, sustainable development. Where did it come from? This is a woman called Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was basically Prime Minister of Norway. And she put this book out with many others, contributing to it, called Our Common Future. Now, I think I need to actually give you some information about this, because that became the Agenda 21, which was the Earth Summit of 1992, and then turns into the Sustainable Development Goals, which are here. So it started with this thing called Our Common Future. And basically, our common future, equity aided by political systems that secure effective citizen participation in decision-making. The UN Environmental Programme, UNEP, should be strengthened as the principal source on environmental data. Does this sound familiar? Out of that, we get the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is not a scientific body. It's a lobbying body on behalf of the United Nations. Two very different things, yeah? So, it's the assessment and reporting and principal advocate and agent for change and international cooperation on critical environment. So the UN has just made itself the go-to place for all information on climate and international cooperation on critical environment and national resource protection issues, land grabbing, in other words. This is a huge land grab. UNEP's Earthwatch programme should be the centre of leadership to the UN system of risk assessment, a new international programme for cooperation among largely non-governmental organisations. NGOs are running this. I've been to many countries. NGOs are a shadow government within every country in the world. And the UN are in every country in the world. Go to anywhere where it's considered to be third world. They are in there. They are empowering the population. They are land grabbing. I was in Nepal recently. The Nepalese know exactly what's happening. They're a very tight-knit community. In this country, not so. Anything can be infiltrated. All your local area, your local council has been infiltrated by these change agents. I'll show you how it works. But basically, yeah, I'll cut to the chase. There's a lot of this, but it's basically totalitarianism. The changes in human attitudes that we call for, that the UN call for, depend on a vast campaign of education or indoctrination, debate and public participation. Now, we're not talking about public participation as we know it. We must design strategies that will allow nations to move from present destructive processes of growth onto sustainable development paths, which means poverty for all. This is about a zero economy. This will require policy changes in all countries. So the UN, in 1987, were requiring, which is a legal term, policy changes in all countries. Ensuring a sustainable level of population. Now, what's a sustainable level of population? They don't tell you. If you look into this, you'll find the sustainable level of population is called the global billion. However, for the time being, they're happy with 3 billion. So that's quite a lot of us who've got to go. Why are you laughing? I like it. It's my sort of sense of humour, this. Reorientating technology and managing risk. Reorientating technology and managing risk. Smart cities, surveillance, Internet of Things. Merging environment and economics in decision-making. Land grab. Privatisation of nature. Control and management of all people, infrastructure and energy. It's a land grab. Even things like, you'll see the words rewilding. It's a land grab. That's all it is. So, Gro Harlem Brundtland brought all this in 1987. The Brundtland Report, it was actually 1983. 1987, Our Common Future came out. Our Common Future was published, defining sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's very woolly and they don't really say much in these things, but once you look at the actual motivation behind it, you start getting the bigger picture. The report highlighted 3 fundamental components to sustainable development: environmental protection, economic growth, and social equity. Okay, environmental protection, managing all land. Economic growth, controlling all economic activity. Social equity, no rights, collectivism over autonomy. That's what that really means. Now, a lot of this came out of the Club of Rome, which is a think tank, an elite think tank. It describes itself as, nothing to worry about here when you read it, a group of world citizens sharing a common concern for the future of humanity. What, billionaire philanthropists, you mean? The World Bank? Interesting. It consists of current heads of state, UN bureaucrats, high-level politicians, to act as a global catalyst for change, the C word, through the identification and analysis of crucial problems facing humanity and the communication of such problems to the most important public and private decision makers, the useful idiots, to enforce it all, as well as to the general public. So this is interesting, isn't it? So you've got an elite think tank who are so concerned about us, they've got to act on our behalf. Fantastic. Now, this is where it came from. The CO2 control system, the carbon dioxide control idea, came from the first global revolution. I'm going to give you a quote from that. This is the Club of Rome published the first global revolution. Divided nations require common enemies to unite them. Either a real one or else one invented for the purpose. Now, that is straight out of KGB handbook ideology, that. That is absolutely KGB. Because of the sudden absence of traditional enemies, new enemies must be identified. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So that's where it all came from. That's the environmental program of the United Nations. The fourth world, the world in our hands. The world in our hands. This was the Earth Summit of '92. This is the guy who became Director General of the United Nations Environmental Program. He's a multi-billionaire, well, billionaire. He had a 200,000-acre ranch called the Baka Ranch, where they performed New Age ceremonies, him and his wife, Hane. And they took mind-altering substances, and they talked about a new world religion. And this guy is the granddaddy of it all. He's a billionaire who was kicked out of Canada. He's from Canada, and he ended up in China because he got involved in the oil for food program. He describes himself as a capitalist by implementation and a communist in ideology. How does that work? That's Maurice, very clever lad, and a very, very good businessman. He went to the United Nations in 1992, and on the back of this report, he said, yeah, the new problem's global warming, what we're going to do about it. Al Gore was there as well. Al Gore said, that sounds great, we can make loads of money out of this. That's exactly how it happened. It's that simple. It's nothing personal, it's just a business. Maurice Strong, yes, Secretary General of both the 1972 United Nations Conference on Human Environment, which launched the World Environmental Movement, and the 92 Rio Environmental Summit. He was the first executive director of the United Nations Environment Program. David Rockefeller was there, Stephen Rockefeller, Evelyn de Rothschild. There's a great video, I'm going to give you the name of it in a minute. A fellow called George Hunt was there. And he was so horrified by what they were talking about. Michael Sweetman of the World Bank was openly saying that the cattle don't need to understand this. We have our business. They don't need to understand it. Okay? And Evelyn de Rothschild, I don't know whether he'd have had a few of his sister's marvellous glasses of wine before he took the stage, but he said, well, perhaps what we could do to slow down global warming is we could put dry ice at the North Pole. And he says it. It's been recorded. He said it. You've got to admire his sense of humour, haven't you? Crisis to be controlled by partnership between government, businesses and NGOs under one super agency. That's it, folks. That's your world government. This will proceed at the expense of national defence. Maurice Strong, current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class. Well, he can talk, can't he? He's only got 200,000 acres, you know. And what he tried to do, incidentally, is steal the water from the aquifer underneath it to sell it off. This fella, he's got more front than your local mini Tesco, involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen convenience food, ownership of motor vehicles, golf courses, small electric appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. They're going. Earth Summit 92. There you go. Yep. Management of all resources on the planet by the UN, adopted locally by your Climate Action Plan. Now it's the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Okay, let's first have a look at the United Nations Charter of 1947. A lot of people don't get what the United Nations is. It's a lawless organization, absolutely lawless because it's above the law. If an organization is above the law, then there's no law. It says in the 1947 Charter. I went to a conference several years ago. There's a lawyer there from Switzerland called Ed, and he was stating openly that the United Nations is above international law and it's a criminal organization, which it is. If you look at, they've got most of the stuff hidden, but when they go into countries, they send in what is basically a mercenary army. These people aren't from that country. They don't care about that country. Side issue, but quite an important one. The UN Charter of 1947 states, the UN and its agencies, properties and assets, wherever located and by whomsoever held, are immune from every form of legal process, search, requisition, and confiscation, from any form of interference, whether by executive, administrative, judicial, or legislative action. If you're above the administrative, judicial, and legislative government, you are above government. They can freely move funds, gold, or currency between countries, will be immune from taxation. The UN are immune from prosecution, but that can themselves bring legal proceedings. That's in their charter. Look it up. There's a papal bull that came out in 1302, and it was a land grab. It was called Unum Sanctum. It stated that everybody outside the universal church was basically in damnation. In other words, that you had to go into the universal church and there was nothing outside it. There was no salvation outside of the universal church. The UN say nobody will be left behind. Kind of similar, but more clever use of language. Global Action Plan. Yeah, basically, Unum Sanctum, it was the biggest claim on world property because it claimed the world in trust for the Holy Roman Empire until Jesus came back. That's what Unum Sanctum was. So there was no salvation outside the universal church. The UN have surpassed it with their Global Action Plan. The Global Action Plan, control of all infrastructure which affects people, banks, NGOs, corporations run the government. It's a technocratic feudal system called globalism, global local. In 2015, Pope Francis addressed the UN Assembly in New York. And he said, sustainable development is rooted in ethical values. I can see a problem here. The Roman Church talking about ethical values. The conference was called Religions and the Sustainable Development Goals. Remember what I said about that fella in 1969? That the churches will help us. He was absolutely right, wasn't he? How did he know that? So, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, yeah. 2,400 representatives of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, the shadow government. 17,000 people attended the Parallel NGO Forum. 172 participating governments, 108 heads of states. Yes, we've seen all that. We don't need to go into them. A fourth world. In our show, The Fourth World, we include the video testimony of George Hunt, and it's called The Elite Plan Well Ahead. If you don't look at anything except this today, do look at this. He was there in 92. He ran a sustainable energy business, and he was horrified about the way that the banks and the likes of Rothschild were talking about this. And he spent the rest of his life trying to wake people up. But unfortunately, the people who produce the propaganda know how to mislead and misdirect the public. Yeah, it was brought into, Maurice Strong, Edmund de Rothschild, speeches by these two are included in the shows. So the Fourth World Wilderness. This is another part of what they talk about. The Fourth World Wilderness, the lostness of the mind. It means no countries, no boundaries, nothing. People will be brought into this world hive mind concept using the New Age, drugs and propaganda at every level of belief. The ultimate aim is a one-world belief system based on Gaia or Earth worship. The point is that this is not about worshipping the Earth. It's about getting people off it. See our previous shows, and there's an article involved with that as well, and it goes into the history of it, and we've compiled it really well. But if you want to just listen to it, it's called New Age Global Governance. It will blow your mind. It's absolutely amazing stuff. Yeah, the assessment concludes that the Earth's biological resources are under serious threat. Again, the Club of Rome. The damage being done today, largely as a result of human activities, will limit the range of options that people will have in the future. Blame attributed to religions for being in denial of the sacred attributes of nature, thanks to Maurice Strong. The living and non-living, plants, animals, and rocks are a community. It means under this land grab that if they designate that you've got some rocks on your land, you cannot move them. They are priority over you. So what this is a reduction of all human rights, inalienable rights. I talk about this a lot. All inalienable rights are gone under this because the UN Human Rights Act makes it out to be every person, everyone has a right to justice under the law as a person. Well, a person is property. A person is something to be conveyed between two parties. Reincarnation from rocks to people is possible. Now, Maurice would know all about this because he had some very strange ceremonies on his Baco Ranch. Yeah, this is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Again, this is what I'm talking about. It brings it into NGOs, puts it into governance. It promotes eco-spiritual practices and principles. Humanity must change its values and behavior. New global ethics finding expression in international law. Well, isn't it ironic that it's the UN enforcing this and they're above the international law? Yeah, the result of the Rio summit in 92 was not much happened, really. Not much happened after 92. It was a creeping process of infiltration into your local council, which probably started with things like speed humps and then 20-mile-per-hour zones, you see. So at Johannesburg, however, in 2002, there was an attendee called General Konstantin Petrov. I would recommend anybody watch his videos. They are in Russian, but they have subtitles. He died in 2009. He knew more about global governance than anybody I have ever heard. What happened this is where it turns into a massively corporate agenda. This is what the regeneration's about, the hive housing, the smart cities, the property going up and up and up in value when it's not worth anything. We will solve all problems of rich and poor countries if you submit to us undivided possession of all infrastructure that ensures the livelihood of people. That's what the banks, the World Bank and the IMF and all these globalists said. We're holding you to ransom. We'll make sure you get your environmental program if you leave it to us. We'll enforce it. Don't worry about that. We'll have the property. So yeah, banks and multinationals take control of all infrastructure which affects the livelihood of the world population. That's 2002. That was the follow-up to that 1992. World Wilderness Congress was established in 1974. The reason I'm telling you this is because it's coming up again, initiating the process that would lead to the World Bank's Global Environmental Facility. Dozens of new public and private protected areas covering millions of acres of land, a massive land grab. Now, we'll get onto that in a minute. Multilateral efforts to restore and protect wilderness across national boundaries. Rewilding everywhere, even in Camden Town. Can you believe this? Camden Town has the least green space of any London borough, and they're putting rewilding corridors in there. Rewilding is a land grab, and what they're doing with rewilding is introducing species which are dangerous to humans. The lynx to be introduced in Scotland, and wolves and bears are being introduced into a conservation area in the UK. Look it up. At the moment, it's like a little zoo that you visit, but this is going to be the future, and it's all been written down. Rewilding. They want to put most of the world back into a wilderness. India 2020. Here we go. Wilderness 11. The 11th World Wilderness Congress is an essential milestone on the way to historic 2020 decision in China. They've got China on board now. Wild 11's goal is twofold: to influence the global decision-making process. Oh, okay. And create new leaders. Wait a minute. I thought it was a conference. You create new leadership at a conference? I thought we voted for them. Am I wrong? Take the ambitious and necessary step of agreeing to protect and interconnect at least 50% of Earth's land and seas. The privatization of the oceans is underway, ladies and gentlemen. There was a documentary on Sky Television very recently with a fella swimming in a swimming cap with UN on it. I thought, here we go. My little conspiracy theory tinfoil hat started to make some impressions in my minuscule and highly active brain. And I put two and two together. What was he talking about? I didn't have to put two and two together. He said it. We need to privatize the seas to protect them. Privatize them. Not protect them, privatize them. Okay. Yeah. Global Call for Action and Outreach Initiative outlining the interdependency of biodiversity and climate and the role nature-based solutions can play to prevent a runaway crisis. The climate emergency! The survival challenge. Here we go. End the sixth extinction by protecting half of Earth, outlining what is expected from world leaders. They're telling world leaders what to do. Communities restore and protect their wildlands. The Wildlands Project, I don't know, it's a bit blurry, this one, but this is basically a corridor system to protect biodiversity in America. It's called the Wildlands Project. Over here we have things like the Wetlands Projects in Waltham Forest. What they did is reclaim marshes. They said, we've built 4 new entrances onto Hackney Marshes. Wait a minute, there weren't any before. They're not entrances, they're gates. You see, everything has to be presented in the form of a benefit. We've done something for you. We've given you entrances onto open land. Why would entrances be put onto open land? To close them off. Oh, how silly of me. Basically, this these red bits are uninhabited, yeah? The yellow bits are buffer zones, highly regulated use, and the green bits are basically NAFTA, or military stuff. So basically, this is the idea that 50% of America becomes uninhabitable. What they started doing there is they've started letting sort of ranches and farms who are out in the middle of nowhere, they let their roads just disintegrate. There's no infrastructure being put in to protect the farms, so people are walking off farms and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube about this in America. It's very, very draconian there. But yes, this is how it's locally. Locally, let's go local now. But first, the UK think tank Demos. Debated with them several times. They push conspiracy theories onto the public. That's what they do. And they get onto all the news and programs and TV, and when we debated with them, they told us that they were in direct contact with the intelligence services and MI5, which was interesting because they try and control the public narrative of the terror agenda as well, which is all part of this, actually. So this is a quote from them, and kind of mind-blowing. The new democracy, remember this is Britain, didn't we have democracy? Apparently not. The new democracy will work with a combination of government, open infiltration, and citizen groups taking direct action. Citizen groups taking direct direct action, extinction, rebellion. Direct action, right? Now, this is really interesting. Government open infiltration. Now, can you believe this? Because that is something that even the Soviets would not admit to. In the Cold War, they wouldn't have admitted to something like that. All right, you've got one choice, no choice, but don't tell everybody. This is incredible to me. Local government. Each local authority, this is chapter 28 of Agenda 21, should enter into a dialogue with its citizens, local organisations and private enterprises. In other words, they put the people in who they want to engage with, and you engage with those people, and they tell you what you're going to have, and you have it. That's how it works. Through consultation and consensus, the C word. Consensus merely means that it looks as though everyone's agreed to something. Doesn't mean anyone has agreed. Yes, formulating the best strategies. Okay, Big Society Change Agents. We did an article on this. It's called Big Society Change Agents. Now, this is 2011. Cameron introduced the Big Society using Saul Alinsky principles. We're going to get onto that in a minute. It's basically a way of subverting what we call democracy to get what you want. Impact and consequences of reductions. This was a parliamentary document. You can look it up. It's on there. The impact of reductions will be one of anger, the degree of which is yet to be realised. As the reality of reduced services hit, people will rise to take action. The key to big society succeeding is to galvanise this energy. In other words, you control all opposition and all protests. You infiltrate everything. There is nothing, no movement, no group in this country that gets up and does anything that is not part of this. I can guarantee you that's why I work on my own. Because once you get local action groups, this is what happens. I mean, for instance, an area in North Wales called Fairborn being put into managed decline because the sea's going to cover it up in 20 years. No, it's not. No evidence for that whatsoever. I got the world's leading expert in sea levels to say we'll go to court over the managed decline. And also, I got onto Lloyd's of London insurers through a friend of mine, and he said, we will underwrite all those properties. It's not going to be underwater. So why are they telling us it is? Because it's a depopulation and rewilding program to grab land on the excuse of giving it back to nature. It's not. It's to keep you off the land. That's what it is. It is a bigger claim than Unum Sanctum, a bigger claim than 1302 when the Vatican took the whole world under their assumed authority. Yeah, interesting stuff. Community organisers, how do they train these people? This is a place called Unlimited, which is in Whitecross Street, just down the road from the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And they train social entrepreneurs. I'm not saying all social entrepreneurs are nasty people, but what they do is they mentor people into these UN principles. They mentor people into them. So in other words, your local social entrepreneur in your little local hub, in your local community, will be on board with this. Interesting that. I didn't put that on there, by the way. Someone's paid for that to be there. Your mind is crazy and tells you lies. It's like They Live, isn't it? I've got my They Live glasses on. I don't know whether you remember that John Carpenter film. And it says, your mind is crazy and tells you lies. And then you take them off and it says, Barclays Bank gives very good interest rates. Your mind is crazy and tells you lies. It's the same thing, I think. Maybe I had my They Live goggles on my camera. Unlimited for social entrepreneurs. This is just one organisation, but there's loads of them. Power to Change, Regenerate, Citizens UK. They keep evolving and disappearing, a lot of these. Power to Change is the big one. We are unstoppable. We are unlimited. We are in every country in the world. We are in every country in the world, Unlimited. And what they do is all sustainable development goals. So it's not a conspiracy, it's just a business plan. Become a UN change agent, Global Vision Institute. Yes! How to be a UN global system change agent. Become a UN change agent. How to create a values-driven UN global system. Be a steward of resources. Oh, recycle. Yes, it's all this kind of fluffy stuff which has nothing to do with what they're actually, everything's presented as a benefit. Okay, ICLEI, has anybody in the room heard of ICLEI? I don't think they have they? This is local government for sustainability, right? Community of local, yeah, International Community of Local Environmental Initiatives, I think it's called, right? By 2050, 2/3 of all humans will be living in cities. That's what the UN are telling us. 2/3 of the world's population. That's a lot of people. That's why they're building all these flats, because they're pushing everyone into cities. They're also moving people around. Most of the people who got evicted from their council property have been moved to different parts of the country. There's a very good reason for this. It's so dissent can't start. In other words, people are going to be against each other. What are these lot doing in our area? That sort of thing. It's just to create the kind of needed friction. ICLEI, Local Government for Sustainability, is the leading global network of more than 1,500 cities, probably a lot more than that now, towns and regions committed to building a sustainable future. Oh, that's all right then, isn't it? ICLEI envisions a world of sustainable cities that confront the realities of urbanization. In other words, high-density cities monitored and surveilled 24 hours a day. And basically, we're talking about the end of money here as well, which we're going to get onto in a minute. ICLEI, local government, yeah. They work with a company called Procurer. We're a network of European public authorities. Public authorities? Didn't know about that, did you? That connect, exchange, and act on sustainable and innovation procurement. In other words, this is an infrastructure that nobody knows about. You all go, oh, we've got a local council. Got nothing to do with them, though. Okay, I'm not going to go into the Frankfurt School and Institute for Social Research. We haven't really got time. But a lot of those goals of what they call cultural Marxism are part of this plan and a part of the control system within that plan. Rules for Radicals, the big society, David Cameron and Obama, army of community organisers, remember that, and organisations. Saul Alinsky was a radical housing activist in the early 60s in America, and he used very, very interesting techniques to coerce people. And when we talk about Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, they can actually be used for good and bad things. But the bad side of it is very bad, especially this. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. In other words, if you're outside the controlled opinion corridor, everyone will turn on you. And that is a big part of what is going on all over the country. People tell me this all the time. So, GLOCAL, the control and management system, people, property, land, all resources, energy, belief, and reality. It's about the control of energy as well. New totalitarianism, let's kind of decode this. Social justice equals collectivism over individual rights. Social equity is poverty for all, redistribution of wealth. Empowerment, divide and rule. Vibrant communities, surveilled human settlement zones. A gym, a mini Tesco, and an eye scanner. Diversity equals monoculture. How do I know this? I used to live in a vibrant and diverse neighborhood. It's not anymore. It's a concentration camp. Okay, they have a microbrewery on a Saturday night in an old warehouse, but that's trendy, you see. So, yeah, this is like the younger generation's idea of a rave, you know, sitting in a car park on empty beer barrels. Yeah, here we go. Globalization rolled out through public-private partnerships. PR companies control local consultation. When you have a local consultation in your area, it will be a PR company. You will get a consultation put through your door. How much more cycling would you like to see? It's not a loaded question, but how much more cycling would you like to see? And what they do, they ask you all these questions, and the people who give the right answers are the people that they choose. Then they just rip up what everyone else has said, and they then bring their own facilitators into the meeting. A facilitator and a co-facilitator, usually. This is another thing. Mega regions are being formed to include groups of councils which will further remove public consultation. That's very, very important. Plans to create a new super district council for East Suffolk have been backed by both House of Commons and House of Lords. It goes on and on. Oxfordshire County Council, they're scrapping our 6 biggest councils and merging into one. 5 Buckinghamshire councils set to merge into one. Just look it up. This is mega regions, mega councils. It means that all public liability of public servants is being taken away because they can't do anything for you anyway. No point voting for them, in my opinion, because it's bigger than that. Crown agents, here's another one. Public, private, they work with NGOs, civil society, they work in over 100 countries. Have you heard of them? No. Stakeholders in client nations. Our consultancy work helps nations achieve deep-rooted change. Of what? What are they changing here? and systems that are vital for nations' prosperity and well-being. We work with governments, NGOs, public and private sector organisations to develop successful leaders again. All these organisations under the UN, they're developing leaders, aren't they? I thought people used to turn to leaders. So a leader was somebody who may have some information, who can put it across for people. Well, these people have information and an agenda that they're trained into, slightly different. Delphi technique, this is how all public meetings that I've been to in London and around the country are held. In your local parish council, it might be slightly different, but not very, okay? Because what they do is, say when they brought in the regeneration of the Elephant and Castle to the Old Kent Road, which is basically most of South London there, they had facilitators and co-facilitators. They split everyone up into 12 groups, and then they give you a load of loaded questions. And they ask you the questions. When you ask them for their details, they say, oh, no. And the facilitator, group facilitator comes over and starts saying, why do you need our details? I said, because you're the people who are putting together the consultation. Oh, no, you speak to the council. No, but it's you who's implementing it, right? No. And they run off. They actually run off. So, yeah. Basically, it was developed by the Rand Corporation in the 1950s, Delphi technique. The first time I saw this was at the Occupy movement, when they introduced general assemblies. What are Extinction Rebellion asking for? Citizens' assemblies. Same thing, right? General assemblies were when people came into Occupy, and all of a sudden, I'm Mark, I'm your new facilitator. Let's have a general assembly. Oh, this is Sharon here. She's my co-facilitator. Don't ask me any questions. If you want to ask any questions, go through Sharon. Basically, she'll gatekeep anything that we don't want up here. And it was a joke. What happened was Occupy was about the financial system. All of a sudden, George Soros got involved. It's all about climate change. They set up a place called the Bank of Ideas, and there was all these organizations which led into Extinction Rebellion, things like Reclaim the Power and Democracy Village, which was set up by the government with government people inside them to control the narrative of public opinion. So basically, when I saw this being implemented, I couldn't believe it. It's like Brave New World mixed with 1984 with a bit of Logan's Run attached as well. It's unbelievable. And the funny thing was, the facilitator at this squat, how do you squat a Swiss bank in London? With great difficulty, but with a little help from your friends, it is possible, right? So basically, this fella turns up, and I've seen him at all these. He's been an agitator in front of the police. He's been pushing barriers and getting annoyed. He gets arrested. Then you see him 5 minutes later, and he's out again. You think, what's happening here? And he was there. I'm your facilitator. And he had a very short haircut. He had a German army coat on. This thing, wear the German army coat, right? And you get some Dr. Martens, take the laces out, yeah? And then, my hair's a bit tidy. Sarge, have you got any dreadlocks? We've only got one. I'll take it. This fella had one dreadlock. I couldn't believe it. And it was just clipped on. And they expect this, but they think this is good enough. Do you know what I mean? They think this is good enough. They think this is good enough, yeah. It's developed by the Rand Corporation Delphi technique in the 50s. It's a way of gaining group consensus, chaired by a facilitator and co-facilitators. Limited choices are given, and the attendees are steered towards the already known outcome. It's like sales. It's like window sales, right? So I come into your house, and I'll say, oh, well, sir, we've got the red one's out of stock, the one you want, but we have got the green one, and I reckon I can get you 2/3 off it if you have it today. That's all Delphi technique is, basically, except it's not as fair as that, because they lie. It's just basically lies, and you don't get anything out of it. Nothing happens at the end. Opposition is shut down through psychological subversion. Dragons are placed in the... Now, the first time I saw this, I couldn't believe it, because we asked some questions at Occupy, and a load of people surrounded us and went, no threat, no threat. Like in your face, it was very, very kind of, it was a dystopian nightmare, you know. And they're known as dragons, and they have them in Extinction Rebellion. I've got the emails here where they're threatening people. It's the same structure, it's the same type of organization, came out of the same type of groups to control the narrative of public opinion. Again, you have to get the public to agree to all this draconian stuff. You have to make them think that there's an emergency, a crisis, and you have to think that, oh, there's people protesting on our behalf here. They're protesting on our behalf, so it must be good, mustn't it? No, they're not protesting on our behalf, they're protesting on their behalf. It's very, very simple. It's a simple thing. Yes, citizen spies, yeah, this is about prevent and contest. I won't really go into that, but it's all about hate crime. Basically, I've had interactions with Crime Stoppers. I took Crime Stoppers down in Kent. If anyone wants to talk to me about that later, I will be available to talk about it. Community hubs, this is where it all happens. When you go into these places, they shut down the community centre, and you get a new community hub. It's always announced, and there's usually really friendly old ladies in there at the front of it, yeah? But that's just the front. That's got nothing to do with it. It's controlling the narrative of local opinion. That's all they're there to do. So yeah, the urbanisation agenda, habitat conferences biannual. Have you heard of habitat conferences, anybody? No, they have them every 2 years. And the planning that's going into your local area is decided by people that you've never heard of who go to these conferences. This is about the 2050 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. Have a look at habitat conferences. These people are on YouTube. They have about 30 or 40 hits. And this is global policy, you know. So yeah, Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, walkable cities, smart cities, all the same thing. The new urban agenda, here we go. UN Habitat, there it is. Implementing the new urban agenda, smart cities, basically hive housing, constant surveillance. World Habitat Day, green building, it's all there. Okay, this is Astana. Now, this is in Kazakhstan. This is a new smart city. I just picked up on this today, actually. Get this, enforcing paperless interactions within businesses. Enforcing it. In a smart city, there's no cash. NEOM, this is in Saudi Arabia. It's a 10,230 square mile city, an economic zone to be constructed in Tabuk, Saudi Arabia. Its description is absolutely utopian, and it may lead to copycat cities around the world. May means must in legal terms, so this is just what the Saudi billionaires are rolling out. The city will function independently from the existing government framework. It has its own jurisdiction. Can you believe this? This is what happened in Waltham Forest. Walk, cycle, enjoy. Road closed. How much more cycling do you want? How much have you got? We've got plenty. Control the narrative. Public opinion is controlled and steered in every part of the country. Change agents create consensus. The Global Action Plan relies solely on climate change, global warming, consensus to implement all global policies, which take away all rights. The globalists need the anti-globalists to implement their policies. This is the interesting bit now when we're talking about the government protest groups. The globalists need the anti-globalists to implement their policies. The anti-globalists need someone to organise, fund and steer their protests, don't they? So the anti-globalists implement the policies of the globalists because they're funded by them. There we go. That's Occupy London. That's the Bank of Ideas, the fake squat set up in a Swiss bank. If I squatted a Swiss bank in the City of London, don't think I'd get away with it, would you? It wouldn't be on the 5 o'clock news, would it? Wouldn't be promoting climate change within 2 weeks. So that was quite interesting. And all the money, wonder where it went. All the money from Occupy. You know where all the money from Occupy went? It went into a bank account called Climate Camp Action. Climate Camp Action, yes, that's related to this lot in the middle. Rising Up, that's the company where Extinction Rebellion came from. It came from, according to Gail Bradbrook, who runs Extinction Rebellion, along with, well, she's basically CEO. They have a company called Compassionate Revolution, a fellow called George Barder, who was part of the group called Democracy Village, which removed Brian Hoare, the peace campaigner, from Parliament Square. They set up on there, fake protest, and Brian Hoare was kicked off. They've stopped all protest there now. So this is what you have to do. You have to control the opposition, you know the whole thing. So Climate Camp, again, that's where the Occupy money went. Occupy London, yeah, Democracy Village. They're all pushing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Farhana Yamin, the UN human rights lawyer, the Extinction Rebellion person who, glued herself to the Shell building despite having a law degree. Kind of strange thing to do. But it's all theatre, folks. That's all it is. Template protests, social engineers. Gail Bradbrook. In social change theory, people react to emotions, not logic and fact. Interesting. She was actually part of Citizens Online, which is all about getting high-tech Internet of Things into people's lives. So she's part of the Smart Cities agenda. Okay, right. Climate emergency, here we go, it's an emergency. I wake up every day and see, thing is, right, if there's an emergency, you generally know about it, don't you? So it's like, oh my God, he's on the floor, he's bleeding. Can we have an ambulance? Are you sure it's an emergency? Yeah, he's losing loads of blood. That's an emergency, right? This is not an emergency. St. Greta, the product of a PR company called We Don't Have Time, showbiz kid. Father's an actor, mother's an opera singer. PR company working for the Global Action Plan, acceleration of the global program, adults to be coerced by children. This is an old Soviet technique. You get the adults to spy and infiltrate on their parents. It's a psychological operation. But we don't have time and our house is on fire. Climate fraud. Here he is. I may be actually peeing on a few people's bonfires here, I don't mean to, but I have looked into this and it's quite shocking, really. BBC Climate Change, the facts. It went far beyond its remit to present the facts of climate change, instead broadcasting a highly politicised manifesto in favour of renewable energy and unjustified alarm. The programme highlighted suggestions that storms, floods, heat waves and sea level rises are all rapidly getting worse as a result of climate change. Well, that's funny because I know one of the world's leading experts in sea levels who used to work for the IPCC until he was so disgusted with their manipulation of climate data that he left. And this is quite unbelievable. However, the best available data published in the last few years by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, remember that's the lobbying body for the UN, and NASA contradicts the BBC's alarmist exaggeration of empirical evidence. That was by the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And when I put that information out, they told me that it was a right-wing conspiracy theory. So the latest Agenda 21 fake protest, this is probably a bit out of time now. It was a few weeks ago, a thing started up called Land Justice and Land Camp. And the reason I mention this is because what they did, it's basically about the common good again. We want to take back land. The commons, they call it. But they're doing it on behalf of Agenda 21. So there's a huge landowner at Hebden Bridge in North Yorkshire. He's got 30,000 acres or something. And these people say, but it's ours, it belongs to the people. These are the useful idiots. The Soviets used to call these people the useful idiots. They'll go, we were reclaiming it for the people. Whenever you see reclaim, be very, very suspicious. It's almost as bad as rewilding. So basically what they did, they turned up on someone's land, they frightened the sheep, they chased the cows away, and guess what? It was a poor tenant farmer that was leasing the land. So they made monumental fools of themselves and had to apologize and go home. But basically on their website, Land Justice, it says restoring the land to ecological health and locking up carbon to address the climate emergency. But for that to happen, politicians need to change the law. Again, it's the UN behind it all. Land Justice UK, state-backed change agents. Yeah, the latest protest group, Direct Action, community action groups. If your local council gets taken over by a community action group, don't join it. Form your own. I'll tell you a bit about how we do it in the end. I don't know whether I've got time for Madame Blavatsky. No, I haven't really, have I don't think. well, sorry? 15 minutes, okay. Well, basically, the origins of New Age global governance come out of Blavatsky and people like Alice Bailey. And her writings were asking basically for global governance. Now, Annie Besant, of course, was a Fabian socialist influenced by Madame Helene Petrova Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, which ironically would probably host this talk, which is quite good, really, isn't it? But, so Alice Bailey was a New Age channeler, and Bailey and Blavatsky channeled the same entity. Now, Robert Mueller, 1923 to 2010, UN Assistant Secretary General, follows the teachings of Alice Bailey. This is, again, going into the Maurice Strong bit again. In other words, they're bringing in this New Age religion. So the Great Invocation, it's all very similar to what the UN promote. For instance, you've got Alice Bailey set up the Lucifer Trust, which was renamed the Lucis Trust. These have seats on the UN. The Lucis Trust have seats on the UN. Bailey speaks of Luciferian Freemasonic master plan of one world government under a world leader or Maitreya. Now, the thing is that what I'm not saying that these people knew that there was the UN going to take over, but they've used this New Age philosophy to mentor it into what they're calling sustainable development. So this is where the great deception is. Alice Bailey, yeah, she said, the master is a busy executive and his job is world direction. I was under observation and I was doing what he wanted me to do. How did she know? I pictured myself as the dramatic and admired teacher of thousands. I felt like I was Joan of Arc, really? I think she might be stretching it a bit there. I felt like I was Joan of Arc and I was seeing spiritual visions and was consequently set aside for a great work. Yes, this is a Freemasonic management concept. This is from the freemasonictrowel.com. I studied Rosicrucianism, and the reason I'm mentioning this is in Rosicrucianism, you have the 12 brothers that hide the 13th brother. In other words, what you see out front is totally different from what's actually going on. The 13th brother is always hidden. And these concepts are very well known to the people within the Global Action Plan. But this is a very important thing. It's about a management concept. Again, people talk about Freemasonry. Where does Freemasonry fit in? It's a management concept. The Lucifer spirit, Samael, united with Eve and begat a semi-divine son, Cain. As he left Eve before the birth of the child, Cain was the son of a widow and a serpent of wisdom. The sons of Cain are fire, or as they call themselves, the Illumined Brotherhood or Luciferians. They work with the sons of Set or water, their priestcraft, to control the sons of Abel, who are also water. This is the blending of fire and water that the Rosicrucians talk about. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why is he talking about that? Because it does tie in to the history behind what I'm talking about here, the Brotherhood of Cain. So yes, agents of climate change. Ottmar Georg Edenhofer, born 8th of July 1961, Lower Bavaria, Germany, is one of the world's leading experts on climate change policy. Policy, not actual climate change, but policy, that's the important thing, right? Environmental and energy policy and energy economics. Okay. From 2008 to 15, he served as one of the co-chairs of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the mitigation of climate change. See, the money is in mitigation. There's no real problem to address because they're not going to address the problem. They're not going to, they do go in and they do a bit of perfunctory work, like lots of people died recently in Nepal. And the thing is that the UN aren't there to help those people. They're there to implement policy. It's about mitigation. That's where the money is. The money's in mitigation. It's not in solving anything. Yes, let's see what he had to say. This is very important. He said this in an interview in 2010. One must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with the environmental policy anymore. Al Gore, the prophet of doom. We should replace employment taxes with a pollution tax system. Because he makes lots of money about it. Has Al sold any of his seafront properties? No, he won't do that. Principally CO2. I really believe that would help our economy, our competitiveness. There you go. What drives climate change? Yeah, here we go. The threat of environmental crisis will be the international disaster key that will unlock the New World Order. Mikhail Gorbachev, 96. Of course, he was there in 92 when all this came out, on the back of Maurice Strong. It doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. In other words, we live in a post-truth world. Its feelings and emotions are what people react to. They don't react to facts. I know this because I can give people facts, and if someone comes up with an emotion, they prefer the emotion to the fact. Most people do. It's inbuilt in us, actually. But, you know, we have to learn critical thinking here. Yeah, that was Paul Watson, co-founder of Greenpeace. Unless we announce disasters, no one will listen. Sir John Houghton, first chairman of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. No matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about justice and equality in the world. Oh, that's all right then. Christine Stewart, former Canadian Minister for the Environment. The data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data. We're basing them on the climate models. Professor Chris Folland, Hadley Centre for Climate Prediction and Research. Now, what we've got to remember here is that NOAA, N-O-A-A, and of course, the IPCC, they've been caught adding to global temperature. The recent Special Report 15, which a climate emergency has been declared on the back of this. Now, if you ask someone from Extinction Rebellion, what is your foundation document? They do not know. There was a very nice chap who'd brought his son down to London to lie on the pavement outside Downing Street. Well, you have to do something, don't you? Just do something. So he brought his son down to lie on the pavement outside Downing Street for a die-in. I mean, the ones in Waitrose are obviously more popular. So I said to his father, I said, oh, what brought you down here? He said, well, we have to do something. I said, where have you come from? Worcester. Oh, that your car, is it? Oh, I see, that 2-litre one. Yeah, okay, so you've increased your carbon footprint for him to lie on the floor. Okay, I've got it now. So, I'm just interested in what you think about the foundation document of Extinction Rebellion. Not a clue. I said, do you realise that it's based on flawed data? And it's been proven to be based on flawed data? Nothing. Well, we have to do something. This is the thing, isn't it? I just find that incredible. It's great. The data doesn't matter, no. The models are convenient fictions. They provide something very useful. You see, the thing is with all the predictions is they've never come true. This is the thing that you will never be told. The predictions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have never, ever come true. Not one of them. Not one. ClimateGate, famous incriminating quotes. Yes. I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temperatures to each series for the last 20 years, and from 1961 for Keith to hide the decline in temperature. This was the ClimateGate emails. But most recently, they've been caught out again. We've got to ride this global warming issue, even if the theory of global warming is wrong. We will be doing the right thing in terms of economic and environmental policy. Timothy Worth, president of the UN Foundation. We need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. Professor Stephen Schneider, Stanford professor of climatology, lead author of many of the IPCC reports. If present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder for the global mean temperature in 1990, but 11 degrees colder by the year 2000. Wait a minute. That was Earth Day 1970. Things have obviously changed. He said, this is about twice what it would take to put us into an ice age. Now, there's the Oregon petition. It's nearly 40,000 scientists now. I've signed a document called the Oregon Petition, lambasting the shoddy research behind global warming, stating any human contribution to climate change has not been demonstrated. Now, I'm not saying here, I'm not trying to tie everything together, because this is what people do. They talk about pollution and climate and weather as though they're the same thing. They're all separate issues, and pollution is something that does need to be tackled. There's no doubt about that. 5 minutes, thanks, Andy. Yeah, consensus. Yeah, okay. Man-made global warming is a hoax that threatens our future and the future of our children. Environmentalism is the new communism, by someone who might know a bit about communism, Václav Klaus, President of the Czech Republic. So, I won't go into this because we haven't got time, but basically, I brought down this new Stasi website. It's called Grindbusters. And what you do is report on people who may have been seen fly tipping, right? Now, their idea of fly tipping isn't chucking loads of sofas and paint everywhere. It's somebody tying up a plastic bag and putting it next to one of their overfilled bins, you know. This is what you get done for. Well, this woman had dropped a cigarette end, and they said they wanted to reconnect with her about littering offences, environmental offences, right? So they printed a picture. Now, this is what I'm talking about, the smart city agenda, the whole of the surveillance thing. This is where it's going. They overstepped the mark here, because when I phoned up and I said to the person who put that up there, who indemnifies you to put a member of the public on a public-facing website? And he says, well, we've got a fine for her. No, you haven't. NSL took a picture of her with no proof. Fines can only be issued by a court, okay? Fines can only be issued by a court. She's not been to court. So that is libelous, right? So I said, who indemnified you to put her picture up? He says, well, I can do this. I can do anything I want. He was very pleased with himself. Phone went down. Next day, Website, gone. Twitter feed, gone. So it can be done. These things through law, this is a petty thing, but it's a big thing. Now, this is a mission statement that I would do your own, but really it puts them on the spot about their own liability. If you've got a group of local residents and you want to oppose anything locally, remember, their people are there to control and manage the situation. So what you need to do is form your own group and be affiliated to no one. We are an unaffiliated group of local residents concerned about the lack of democratic process in local government planning and policy. We will remain unaffiliated as individuals, not a collective, as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. Well, they can't argue with that, can they? Because that's what they're telling you that they're giving you. We are not affiliated with any group or organization whatsoever. This does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. We do not agree with arriving at a consensus through being steered into predetermined outcomes by trained facilitators, either working for the council or public-private partnerships. We deem this to be against the public interest and an affront to democracy. Think about that, and thanks very much, everybody.